The American Revolution by Linda Powell, Ottawa University. Course ID HPS 11053, American Experience, Professor Metz, March 27, 2022. Events that led up to the Revolutionary War. There were several events that led to the Revolutionary War. The Stamp Act was one of the first events that led up to the Revolutionary War. King George and his advisors agreed that it was only fair and right that the colonies should help pay for food and other expenses for the soldiers. The British decided that the colonies should share 1/6 of the yearly cost of feeding and housing the soldiers, which was to be paid for by the Stamp Act. The Americans objected to the Stamp Act, to the surprise of the British Parliament. The Americans may have taxed themselves to help support the British soldiers during the French and Indian War, but they were totally unwilling to allow an outside party to tax them for the same purpose. The Stamp Act was soon repealed. The British Parliament did not wish to appear weak in the face of the American protest, and the British still needed money. So, the British Parliament set up the Declaratory Act, the Townshend Acts, and the Intolerable Acts. The Townshend Acts accomplished four things. One act suspended the New York legislature until it complied with the Quartering Act of 1765, which required legislators to house and provide supplies to British troops stationed in the colonies. It imposed import taxes on tea, lead, paper, paint, and glass, while a third act allowed the tea to be imported to the colonies free of taxes that were levied in Great Britain. The fourth act restructured the customs service in the colonies, placing its headquarters in Boston. The Intolerable Acts were where Great Britain retaliated against the violence and disobedience in the colonies. The Intolerable Act was to punish the colonies for their resistance to the British taxes. The British Parliament was either inflicting taxes on the colonies or making declarations of their right to tax them. As each act of Parliament was passed, Americans grew angrier. All of this caused the colonies to protest against the rule from Great Britain, which is what led to the Revolutionary War. Loyalists were made up of mostly rich people that supported the rule of the British Crown in the 13 colonies. These people had special privileges from the British rule. They had high-ranking jobs, better business opportunities, and they continued to trade with the British. The Loyalists never wanted the 13 colonies to be free from Great Britain. When American colonists started revolting against British rule, these people supported the British government to end the rebellion. Loyalists also fought against the Patriots along the side of the British. Their support to the British Crown against the colonies turned them into the enemies of the revolutionaries. After the Revolutionary War, revolutionaries started harassing them to leave the newly formed United States of America for Canada. Gangs made up of patriots started attacking, killing them, and robbing their properties. The revolutionaries considered them to be enemies of the United States of America. Patriots were also called revolutionaries, Continentals, rebels, or American Whigs, and were those colonists of the 13 colonies who rejected British rule during the American Revolution. They declared the United States of America as an independent nation in July. They opposed the Loyalists who supported continued British rule. Patriots represented a large spectrum of social, economic, and ethnic backgrounds. They also included slaves and freemen. The Sons of Liberty were formed by Samuel Adams in response to the acts that the British Parliament was passing against the colonists. The Sons of Liberty staged violent attacks against the British to protest these acts. Rebellions, disorganized states, and an ineffective Continental Congress threatened to destroy the great experiment that was America. The country, however, managed to get its act together and write the Constitution, which we are still using today. Soldiers in the Revolutionary War. The soldiers that served in the Continental Army fought for the 13 colonies in the Revolutionary War. The majority of the Continental Army soldiers were young and inexperienced, but they were motivated to win the freedom for the colonies. There were 230,000 soldiers that served in the Continental Army, but there was only about 48,000 that were signed up to serve at any one time. The enlistment age for the Continental Army was 16 to 55, but with parental consent, boys could sign up at the age of 15. The majority of the Continental soldiers were young men about the ages of 17 to 18 years old. The older soldiers had more responsibilities at home, such as families to raise and farms to tend to, so they usually joined the local militia. The militia was a part-time commitment that worked locally and didn't have to march off to war like the Continental Army did. For the most part, the men that did not sign up to fight in the Continental Army were loyal to the Crown, and they believed that they were better off with the influence of the Crown. They were often merchants, and they traded with Britain. Selling goods to Britain is what made these men wealthy, and they were not inclined to give this money up. Some of the white men that did not fight in the Revolutionary War were too old, but they supported the efforts in other ways. The men in these colonies, especially if they had families, mainly fought to maintain their way of life. Many families immigrated to the United States in order to ensure religious freedom, which was threatened by the British rule. The exact number of women who served in the Continental Army is unknown, but it is considered to be small in comparison to the hundreds of women who fought in the American Civil War. Women who had patriotic motives for military activity did not have to join the Continental Army to take part. There was also little economic incentive for women to enlist. Women had duties at home to attend to, such as raising their children and running their homes. They also helped attend to the sick and injured. Women in the Revolutionary War were asked to live more frugal during the times of Revolutionary War, which aided the colonies in their efforts for independence from Great Britain. There were around 500,000 African Americans who served as soldiers in the Revolutionary War. Although the Continental Congress voted to ban African Americans from joining the Army on November 24, 1775, and informed existing black soldiers that they would not be allowed to reenlist, they soon reversed this decision and allowed the existing black soldiers to reenlist, but refused to allow new black soldiers to join. This policy was abandoned when the states realized that they needed all the soldiers that they could get, regardless of their race, in order to meet the needs of the Army. The only all-black regiment in the Continental Army was the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, which officially began recruiting African Americans and Native Americans in February of 1778 after the Rhode Island General Assembly voted to allow the enlistment of black men and natives. The free African Americans returned to their farms in the North, and they tried to make a living for their families and rebuild their farms that were destroyed during the war after the conclusion of the Revolutionary War. When the American Revolutionary War broke out in the colonies, slavery in the New England colonies had ended. The Native Americans were discouraged from getting involved in the Revolutionary War at the beginning. Both the colonists and the British perceived the war in its early days as a squabble between families. However, as the war dragged on, outside help became necessary on both sides. The Native Americans began trying to figure out which side was best positioned to protect their land or whether it was in their best interest to remain neutral.